Journey to the West, an audio drama series. Production notes. Episode 4. Hello, dear listeners. This is Lynn, the voice of the fifth monkey. We are at episode 4 now, and in this episode, we will focus on two main topics. 1. Wukong's new job in the Heavenly Palace, and 2. The mythical origins of Heavenly King Li, the pagoda bearer, and his son, Ne Zha. So in chapter 4, Wukong has obtained the new title, Bi Ma Wen. We purposely didn't translate this name at all because it is too iconic to be turned into another language. Let me explain why. First, we need to dissect the name by character. Bi Ma Wen is a made-up title that doesn't actually exist for real-life stablemen. In fact, the name is almost designed specifically to humiliate the Monkey King. The phrase Bi Ma Wen in folk language and popular understanding quite straightforwardly means averting horse illness, with Ma meaning horse. However, the creators of Journey to the West replaced the characters Bi meaning to avert and Wen meaning disease, plague, with more decent-looking homophones, so they appear more like an official title. So even just on the surface, the name Bi Ma Wen is already an outright pun handed out by the Jade Emperor. The title does not refer to any real position in the real world. Very respectful there. But it gets worse. The reason why this name is meant to humiliate the Monkey King is because monkeys were traditionally kept in stables as some sort of mascot that keeps the horses healthy. This tradition dated back centuries before the novel was written. You can find numerous ancient drawings and carvings in China featuring a monkey tied by the neck, appearing close to horses and other livestock. The 6th century agricultural classic Qi Ming Yao Shu, or Essential Techniques for the Welfare of the People, quoted in their chapter about raising livestock. Often tying a macaque in the stable could keep the horses free from fright, evilness, and disease. Basically, monkeys have, for centuries, been kept in stables to protect horses. They're often tied with a rope and don't seem to have anything to do other than just being there. In other words, an unslaved mascot. So, Bi Ma Wen is not only a pun that makes sure no one would take Wukong seriously, it is also a direct insult to a monkey by indicating that he was nothing more than a stable mascot. Wukong was fooled because at this stage in his life, he was obviously too naive to understand such ill intentions. Interestingly, if you look at his record in the imperial stables, he obviously loved the job. He enjoyed spending time with the horses and he took pride in doing a good job. So the job content was not the issue. The issue was the title itself and how others would perceive him. He was okay with the labor, but not okay with other people looking down on him and treating him as some low-skilled worker. And from this point forward, the name Bi Ma Wen became a stain in his life. You will hear this title invoked again and again by various opponents in the future, all with the purpose to insult Wukong and hurt his pride. And almost every single time, Wukong would be successfully agitated and go into a rage. That's why we chose to keep the name Bi Ma Wen the way it is, because at a certain point, its literal meaning no longer matters, and it has turned into a curse word directed at Wukong and Wukong alone. We want to keep that emotional impact in the story, so Bi Ma Wen is the way to go. Speaking of horses, in Chapter 4, Part 1, we briefly introduced the heavenly horses without mentioning any specific name. In the original text, there was a lengthy poem listing these famous and legendary horses by name, including Chi Tu, the red hare, a horse famously owned by General Lu Bu of the late East Han or Three Kingdoms period. But clearly we did not have the time and capacity to explain the backstory of every horse, so we went for a more general description, only painting the big picture. For more details on these horses, please refer to the complete English translations, where Mr. Anthony Yu admitted that the poem was, quote, exceedingly difficult to translate, unquote. Moving on to the next topic. In Chapter 4, we were introduced to two new characters, Heavenly King Li Jing, the pagoda bearer, and his youngest son, Ne Zha, the third prince. These two gods and their tales are extremely iconic and well-known in Chinese culture. You either already know their stories by heart or have seen some recent adaptations about them. But we won't go into those today. Instead, we would like to take you back in time and see how these two characters came into place. Let's start with the dad. Who is Li Jing? Li Jing, in fact, was a well-known general in early Tang Dynasty who made crucial contributions to the dynasty's quest to unify China. He was believed to be alive between 571 to 649 AD and remained a much regarded figure after his death, which means he was very much a contemporary of Xuanzang, the monk who actually took the journey to the west. Within 2 centuries after Li Jing's passing, there have been texts indicating that he was beginning to be deified due to his military accomplishments. At this point in time, he was very much still himself a Tang Dynasty god of war type of character. No pagoda, no children yet. But things started to change as the Buddhist god named Vaishnavana entered the picture. Vaishnavana is one of the 4 great heavenly kings of Buddhist legend, also known as 多闻天王 in Chinese. We have met Zengzhang Tianwang, or Heavenly King Vududak, in Chapter 4. He guarded the southern gate of heaven, whereas Vaishnavana was in charge of the north. As the worship of Vaishnavana became popular in China around the Tang Dynasty, the character also became known for god of war characteristics. There would be legends of him bringing heavenly troops to help a battle in crisis. And in relics from the period, we started to see the pagoda and a baby boy appearing alongside Vaishnavana. The baby boy, of course, would eventually become Ne Zha. The name Ne Zha is also a transliteration from the Sanskrit name Nalagva, who was the son of Heavenly King Vaishnavana. Because it is a transliteration of the Sanskrit name, different places and dialects may have different pronunciations for Ne Zha. We chose to call him Ne Zha because this is the name used in Standard Mandarin, and basically everyone would know who we are talking about regardless of what dialect they speak. So in earlier texts, Ne Zha was related to Heavenly King Vaishnavana, but has nothing to do with the deified general named Li Jing just yet. By Yuan Dynasty, the period preceding Ming Dynasty during which Journey to the West came into form, the images of Li Jing and Heavenly King Vaishnavana began to merge. And remember what we said about Journey to the West being the product of the collective imagination? The same goes for Heavenly King Li Jing, who by this time has been created as a hybrid of 2 distinct figures. Storytellers began expanding his family story, adding a wife and 2 older sons prior to Ne Zha, which is why Ne Zha became the 3rd prince. It was also during the Yuan Dynasty that the commonly known folklore surrounding Ne Zha's birth, misbehavior, suicide, and rebirth solidified. Coincidentally, a lot of the stories and elements of Journey to the West also originated from the same period, which was why we always reiterated the fact that Journey to the West was not the product of one man's creativity, but a collective project involving artists from centuries prior. So by the time Journey to the West was written, the widespread story of Heavenly King Li, the pagoda bearer, and Ne Zha was not very different from how we know them today. Unlike either Li Jing or Heavenly King Vaishnavana, this hybrid Heavenly King Li Jing, the pagoda bearer, has a complicated relationship with his son, the powerful and rebellious Ne Zha. The pagoda Li Jing held in his hand was a symbol of Ne Zha's submission to Buddha, not to Li Jing himself. This meant that without the pagoda, Ne Zha still had every reason to seek vengeance from his father. We will go more into this in the future, a very distant future that is. Basically, by showing the origins of these 2 characters, we want you, dear listeners, to know where they came from, but also not to mix them up with their source characters. Real General Li Jing was a renowned military genius. Heavenly King Vaishnavana is a Buddhist deity. Heavenly King Li Jing is a character based on the aforementioned 2 figures, but became a man of his own. The pagoda and his son Ne Zha also originated from Buddhist texts, but have taken on new meanings. Heavenly King Li Jing needed the pagoda in his hand, so his son Ne Zha would still obey him. Journey to the West did not spend a lot of time explaining their backstory, but treated it almost like a known fact, indicating that by the time the novel was being created and circulated, the tales of father and son have become common knowledge that required no further explanation. Before we wrap up this episode, we would like to cover a couple more smaller things. First is the royal first-person pronoun. In the original text, the Jade Emperor called himself Zhen, which is the first-person pronoun reserved exclusively for empress. Following the Yu and Jenner translations, we went with the royal plural as a translation for Zhen, which was why in chapter 4 you hear him referring to himself as we. That is the majestic plural and not the common we. The same goes for other emperors in the story. And by the same principles, you will find descriptions of an emperor's appearance and actions to be distinct from that of the common person. For example, an emperor's eyes are not just eyes, but dragon pupils and phoenix eyes. You will easily pick up these details as you listen on. We also saw many star gods in chapter 4. Star names, like animal names, can be just as confusing. You can have multiple titles for the same celestial body and multiple titles for the god of that celestial body. On top of that, while some stars are real and you can find them in the night sky, some aren't actually stars in the astrological sense. I will go into more detail when we meet more of these gods in future chapters. But for now, it's just a fun fact for y'all. And that's all for this episode. We would like to thank dear patron Kelly for sponsoring this episode. All of our members at the Fifth Monkey are working for free on this project, so we would really appreciate if you could support us on Patreon and keep the project running. Our Patreon page is in the descriptions, and there are several perks for you to unlock. Before you leave, don't forget to 一键三连 or subscribe. This is the Fifth Monkey, and thank you for listening.